Welcome to Against the Current, a podcast created to give public and private sector leaders, both current and emerging, as well as advocates and cultural voices, a platform to share their perspectives with candor and conviction. Each episode goes beyond talking points to uncover the real stories, challenges, and lessons shaping today's most important causes. These conversations connect directly to decision makers, donors, and supporters who want to understand not just what an organization does, but why it matters. You'll hear how faith guides leadership, how conviction drives action, and how bold ideas are shaping the future of freedom and culture, both here at home and around the world. Here is your host, Matt Waters.
Thank you, Ellen Fantini, for being here as my guest on the Against the Current podcast. For those of you who are watching, know that we talk to voices that you've never heard from before in the States mostly, and they're doing things that are against the current, which is exactly what the European Conservative magazine is doing. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about why it's against the current. You know, so many Americans, we visit places where you are in Austria and in Vienna and in Italy and Budapest and France, and we know kind of the lay of the land. We know the cities and the monuments. But what you're telling us is about a whole political movement bubbling under the surface that's rising, that's interesting, that's fascinating, that is really changing and actually influences some of the things we do here and vice versa here across the pond. So we're having communication between Trump and Orban and Nigel Farage and others like that. It's a fascinating outgrowth of conservatism. I mean, you know, in America, we always say, oh, conservatism, it's Ronald Reagan, it's the founding fathers. But you all have a whole new thing happening. It's different. It's not what we would consider, in some ways, conservatism. I mean, you don't necessarily have the Second Amendment where you're carrying guns around, but you have a lot of other things you're doing regarding Christianity and Western civilization and free speech and immigration. That's where I think we share there. But Ellen, why don't you introduce yourself and tell folks about a little bit of just the opening of the European Conservative magazine?
Sure. So the European Conservative magazine is a quarterly. We're just putting the winter issue to bed. It's a quarterly magazine that grew actually out of a group of intellectuals that started meeting, and from there, their proceedings were published as the European Conservative, a few pages, a newsletter. And my husband, Mario Fantini, who's the editor in chief of the European Conservative, decided to make it a magazine. Decided, well, let's see what I can do. Let's see how I can do this in my spare time. And it grew. And we like to say it sort of went viral. In fact, we were sending out PDFs to everyone we knew. And Mario tells a wonderful story of being in an airport and kind of out of the corner of his eye, he saw somebody on an iPad looking at the European Conservative, and it was somebody he didn't know. And so he said, "Oh, excuse me, sir. Um, I couldn't help but notice what are you reading?" And he said, "Oh, this is this PDF called the European Conservative. It comes out, well, semi-regularly, and it's fascinating." And Mario said, "Wow, it looks really beautiful," and, prompting the guy to agree with him. But yes, so we've been publishing, some form of the European Conservative for about 17 years. I can't believe it. The last 3 years or so have been what most people know as the European Conservative. So we have the quarterly magazine, looks like this, and this is our most recent, and I have to show you the spicy cover, which is a family enjoying their meal, but the threats to the family and to our civilization are visible in the windows. So we have the quarterly magazine. We also have europeanconservative.com, which is our news analysis commentary website. So those two products complement each other. You have the deep dives, the long thinks, the articles in our magazine. It does belong on a coffee table, but it also is nice to dip in and out of. And Matt, when we spoke before, we talked a little bit about the importance of beauty to our project, and we like to say that everyone's talking about we have to save the West, we have to save Western civilization, but we think that if we don't show people the treasures of our civilization, we don't know what we're trying to save. So our magazine is filled with art. I'm just looking through it and admiring the beautiful art. And some people have told us, you can't combine political philosophy and book reviews and beautiful art and current affairs all in one journal. But we seem to have been able to do that, and people seem to like it quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you're bringing in too, right? So where like the Spectator is British, and there's kind of the U.S. version, and it's solely English. I mean, you're going into Italy and France and Germany and Austria and Hungary and Slovakia. You're kind of giving the ground game everywhere. Not even reporting on it, but you're giving original sources. I was reading about the former prime minister of Slovakia, his address he gave somewhere, and it's fascinating to get it right from the horse's mouth. And it's not in sound bites. It's not in highly curated in such the way that like a news feed would. You get the whole thing, and you can really kind of rest and read through it, and think about it. Yeah, to your point, but yes.
Well, what we've tried to do is expand our audience's understanding of the different European conservatisms, right? So there's no one European conservatism. And because we publish in English, I think a lot of people rightly, and understandably, in America, think of the Anglo-American tradition, and they view politics and political philosophy through an Anglo-American lens, and certainly there are treasures to be found there. I'm an American, I'm quite proud of our founding and our founding's, documents, but to find conservative thought in English by thinkers from Portugal. That this issue has a whole section on Portugal. We're just finishing the winter issue that has a section on a Spanish political philosopher. And so we find that English speakers are really delighted to learn something they've never heard before, to rethink um, what political philosophy and conservatism might be through the lens of, for example, countries that have lived through communism, or countries that have a much more explicit, for example, religious background. Maybe they have a state religion. For Americans, that's an interesting concept. So anyway, so that's the mission.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, you're right. I mean, here we are in 2025 in the States at least, and we have this guy named President Donald Trump. And Donald Trump broke all the narratives, right? He smashed them, and he takes great delight in smashing narratives and busting up things. And that's kind of his thing. And that's okay. He's our warrior, he's our fighter. And we need a new, fresh wind of language. Even use of language gets old. I know that I've worked with firms, we do a lot of public relations, and you say, well, get the US out of the UN. And conservatives have said that for 35 years. And it kind of gets old after a while, right? Well, what about we forget even what the UN is at some point, or, and so introducing the way others interact with their own issues, right? They have, you have socialism, you have an aging population, you have the question of falling birth rates that we all kind of, and how are we dealing with those things? And each country's kind of dealing with it a little differently, right? Trying to figure this out. And the needs are different because, the social structure that you all have and some of the European countries have is very different than ours. And then you look at things like, well, you're living longer, we're dying sooner, we're spending more on healthcare, but yet we live less, live our shorter lifespan. So it really is fascinating. And then, I mean, yet the Maha thing, right over here, it's make America healthy again. And question is, I can go. I mean, most Americans can go to Europe and Italy and drink wine and eat pasta every single day, and come home and lose weight. What's going on with the food chain, right? So you talk about all this. So in fact, one of the you held up an article. I'll hold up one of my favorite ones, which is the Good Reset, and this was on in your magazine. If you can see that, but it talks about the no EMF, shrinking cities, happy farmers, kids reading books, lots of children, and that's really kind of where we are right now. We're right there. So it's really the cross pollination of ideas, getting a fresh wind, a fresh fire, as it were, is is terrific. And then on top of it all, the Europeans are winning races politically.
Right. Yes. Well, I mean, it's very interesting to think about this cross-pollination as you describe it, and I think for a very long time, and I think this, still goes on, that the cross-pollination or import-export of very bad ideas has plagued, Europe and America. So, Europe has sent some terrible ideas to the United States, and the can-do spirit of Americans has made them sometimes worse, and and the opposite is true, of course. I mean, sitting here in Vienna, Austria, a few years ago, and knowing that there was a Black Lives Matter protest in this city that is obviously the export of the American, you know, woke industry, let's say. So these bad ideas go back and forth all the time, and it's very interesting and, I mean, certainly rewarding to see some good ideas, going back and forth. I can say for Europe, Donald Trump's, presidency, particularly this 2nd term, has definitely put the wind in the sails for a lot of the, let's say, nationalist populist parties. And, speaking of sort of terminology, I mean, even the word conservative, I think, is getting a rethink. We rethink it all the time, and labels like left and right sometimes stop making as much sense as they used to. So it's really an interesting time um, to navigate these somewhat choppy waters.
Ellen, you are in Vienna, Austria, and you're an American citizen. How in the world did you end up in Vienna? What's what happened? How'd that happen?
Well, I could give you a one-word answer and just say love. My husband, is also American. He was living and working in Europe, before we got married, and, when we decided to get married, it seemed like an awfully good idea for us to live in the same, uh, city, same continent, same city. So I left my job and moved to Vienna, where I knew one person and couldn't speak German, and, we've been having a wonderful adventure for almost 15 years now. So that's what got me to Austria.
That's so you are a trained attorney, correct?
I am. I am. In a previous life, I was a criminal prosecutor.
Here in the States.
Yes.
And your home is, tell me again where your home is.
I grew up in Vermont.
Vermont. I knew it was the Northeast. I was going to say Maine. So Vermont, home of Bernie Sanders.
Yes. Well, yes, home of Bernie Sanders. In fact, I was having a very interesting discussion, with a Portuguese friend the other day about Vermont, and he said, "Oh, it looks so beautiful," and he said, and it's quite conservative, isn't it?" And I said, "Well, actually, historically, that's true. I mean, for most of its history until, the 1960s, Vermont was the most reliably Republican state, very, very conservative. Uh, it was farmers and, some industry quarries, and then the Back to the Land movement, as well as a series of sort of a perfect storm of bad legislation, the interstate highway system, all of these things converged on Vermont and people like Bernie Sanders, Ben and Jerry, let's say, and others decided that, Vermont would be a perfect place to call home. It's perfect exactly the way it is, now let's change it, and that's been happening for 50 years or more.
Ernie, it's an interesting story about him. I don't know if you know this, but he ran for mayor of, I think, Burlington, and he won that election, I think, by like under 10 votes. It was really close. And had he not won that election, there's speculation that he would have never run again and gotten a job, and we would have never heard of Bernie Sanders.
Well, it is interesting. Well, and I mean, I remember when I was in high school in Vermont, and we always had in Congress, we always had a Democrat, a Republican. The governor might be a Democrat, might be a Republican. Remember Crazy Howard Dean? We also can claim, Crazy Howard Dean. But what was interesting was that it very much was the kind of place that, voters liked a person or liked a person's policies and didn't care so much about the parties. Those places, certainly Vermont, um, I'm not sure that they exist anymore in America. I mean, Matt, do you think that there's a place in America where people en masse vote really for issues and people and not for parties? I mean, I think those days are gone.
You're saying that people vote for parties.
I'm saying now, absolutely they vote for parties. What was interesting about Vermont was that we had representation of, various parties and then, of course, independents, and it was much more issue-based than party-based, and I think those days are gone.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. That's an interesting, we had elections here in my home state of Virginia yesterday.
Yeah, sure did.
And, I mean, it kind of went as expected, unfortunately. We're a blue state. And you're right, but for a long time in the Commonwealth of Virginia, you had, a Democrat governor one year, a Republican governor the next. Even on the ballot, for an attorney general or lieutenant governor, sometimes that would be a different party, different parties there. And those days are gone. I mean, gone. You're right. I mean, it is about allegiance to the party and the ideas, and it's a big change. Yeah, I think you're right about that. I mean, and unlike Europe, we have two parties, right? So I think that's one of the things when we go back, and we'll bring it back to your side of the pond. You get one of the complicating factors, and when we look at elections, in Great Britain or wherever, there's like 10 parties on the ballot. We're like, wait, what? And they're forming this kind of coalition. And there are also different governments within, the European Union, and, just different types of government, different types of systems. It's just, yeah, it's hard to keep up with. But your magazine kind of does that. You kind of get there, but with the overarching idea that there's a conservative, and to your point, it's a changing definition. It means something a little different to the Hungarians and the British. But I think it is nationalistic. There's people that love their country. They want to put their country first, Hungary first, or England first, or whatever. And in that way, we do have common ground, and we respect that. I mean, I think we totally respect mostly. But there's a place called Brussels that doesn't really like a lot of that, and that's kind of, I think that's probably your fight, is it? Is it not?
Well, it's certainly a huge fight. I mean, as an American, it's been interesting to navigate these waters and to understand how countries, form their governments, these coalitions, some of which are so absurd that you just never imagine that these different parties will come together. But of course, they're coming together against the common enemy, which is usually um, the ordinary person's voice, the populist, nationalist, sovereigntist. I mean, sovereigntism, or this idea of a nation should be able to decide who enters, who stays, the rules it makes, even if they're part of the European Union. And the European Union was really founded with this idea that sovereignty of the nations was still supreme, and this idea of subsidiarity. So, if a nation can solve something on its own, the Brussels shouldn't be involved, and um, that's faded away, and so Brussels, much like Washington, although maybe Washington on steroids, uh, has involved itself with every facet of Europeans' lives, and what's really important to remember when we talk about Brussels, yes, the members of the European Parliament are elected officials, um, but they don't they don't make law. They don't make law. Then you have the European Commission, and maybe some of your, readers have heard about, Ursula von der Leyen, and she is the president of the European Commission, and she's never been elected by a ordinary European voter to do anything, and yet she's the most powerful person in Europe. Um, it's amazing. It's absolutely astonishing. She's fondly known in some circles as Queen Ursula because, in fact, as Americans wave their sign saying "No kings," in Brussels, there is definitely a queen. It's Queen Ursula, and, all of this is just what people are putting up with. So yes, it's been fascinating to navigate this, and I'll talk a little bit more about the cordon sanitaire, in a little bit because, that's another thing for an American that, I can't understand.
Yeah, I would say there's I mean, in my view, and I'm going to take a very well, I would if I'm going to classify myself in the states, hard right, I'm constitutionalist, kind of where I fall. If it was not the Constitution, then that's kind of what we're trying to conserve is those values there: free speech, gun rights, et cetera, freedom of religion, which is all under attack. Although so with Trump and a government shutdown that's the longest ever, I'm told now, which is great. I don't think the Americans even miss the government, except those who are getting paychecks. Um, but for the ordinary American, I don't think really. I think it's kind of a little bit of a lesson here that okay, well, there's no federal government, so all right. Um, so I see Washington as the enemy, right? Washington, the government, the deep state, administrative state, whatever you want to call it. We are involved, and I think it's easier to show the countries we're not in as opposed to all the countries we're in. I think there'll be 2 or 3 countries we're not in, and that's because like the Kenyans or someone voted us out, right? So we're involved everywhere, and I find that as a kind of a I'd say a populist, non-interventionist, America firster. What are we doing, right? Why why are we sending the CIA in to topple the Venezuela government? I don't think that's necessarily our job. I don't know why we'd be, unless there's some nefarious activities, I guess. But we've done that. We did that in Iran in 1953. I don't think it worked out too well for us. We used to get along with the Middle East pretty well, but we don't anymore. It's just a disaster. From Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, all these countries. It's dicey. And I feel like Washington is a huge, big problem, right? Our security state, our work in the Ukraine, from blowing up a pipeline, probably in all probability, to so I don't see the Russians, the Chinese. Yeah, are they dangerous? Sure. Yeah, they spying on us, of course, and we're spying on them. That's kind of, I feel like it's fair game, but we're involved militarily in ways that other governments are not. And that's where it gets a little bit okay. And look, we got sons and daughters going to places like, was the famous movie Black Hawk Down, you die in a field in Somalia for what? Or a 20-year war in Afghanistan. Why? And to find, WMDs that weren't there, right? Dick Cheney just passed away. God rest his soul in the last few days. But, he's going to be known for, creating this war and to get our involved. So, but Brussels too. Brussels is very involved. So I see the kind of the hydra-headed monsters. Brussels and Washington is where I'm going. They're the danger. I'm really not that concerned about Tehran or Moscow or Beijing. That doesn't really concern me. What concerns me is my own government. I don't know. That's my sense.
Well, yeah, well, it's been a massive wake-up call, to Europe to, to have the Trump administration and Trump himself basically tell Europe, "You are in charge of yourselves. We're not going to take care of you forever. You need to pay for your own defense. You need to have a plan." I mean, it's like a father talking to, a son who's maybe, like, you know, in his mid-40s, but still living at home and saying, like, "Alright, you need to go out and take care of yourself. We'll probably always have your back, but you're in charge of your own defense, and by the way, if we are going to help you." I mean, JD Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference was like a shot in the vein. I mean, it was fantastic because what he told what he's basically saying is, "Look, you all want our money, you want our support, you want our protection, but meanwhile, you're not following the basic rules of democracy. So this is a conditional relationship."
How did Europeans react to that, Ellen? How did Europeans react to a Trump and a JD coming over? Essentially, tightening the purse strings a little bit, said, "Hey, we don't want to continue doing this." And B, your free speech, it's a real major problem. What you're arresting Christians for making posts on X or whatever, quoting John 3:16 because the church voted a certain way. Now you're going to go to jail for 2 years. Are Europeans dialed in on this at all?
Yeah. Well, yes. So let's say, the Hydra was shocked. I mean, so the deep staters were shocked that somebody could speak to them that way, and that was beautiful. And for the ordinary European who feels the way you do about Washington, they feel about Brussels. It was it was fantastic. It was in every paper. No one could miss it, and, s yeah, I mean, nobody's ever told these people, um, what he told them, what Trump tells them, except for their own right-wing politicians who are, of course, labeled as fascists and, far right and all that. So to hear them talk was really, I think, very, very good for the European right.
Yeah, it's refreshing for us here too to hear it. I think our military, I'm in a heavily, heavily industrialized military state, and to cut off their junkets in Germany for 2 years in Italy, I can see why they would be opposed to that because I would love to go spend a couple of years hanging out in Great Britain or Italy, paid for by the taxpayer. Sounds great. Uh, but we can't afford it, right? I mean, that's there lies the issues. We're spending a lot of money with these forward-facing bases all over the place. That's expensive. It's really expensive to do that. So the lurch from Brussels, we talk about globalism, one world government, all these kind of terms, right? Orwellian. Is the pushback we're seeing in Europe, is that gonna stick? What's your trajectory of it right now?
Well, I do think it's going to stick. I mean, look, France, what a mess France is. We can talk for an hour just on what a mess France is. But as a result, the Rassemblement National, or we'll call it the National Rally, which is Marine Le Pen's party, um, they're polling in first place. Even without Marine Le Pen, standing as president. That's a saga. I mean, politicized, court case and a sentence that forbids her from running for office, which is just how can you be a democracy and allow that? Anyway, Jordan Bardella, um, has stepped up to the plate, and the French are fed up. Of course, The French have been fed up before and then succumb to infighting, and the left makes these, let's say, ridiculous alliances to try to beat the right. But they seem to be, so far surging. The alternative for Germany, the AfD in Germany, um, handily in first place, I think, by a lot of polls these days. Here in Austria, the Freedom Party, way ahead. Um, and and you have Giorgia Meloni, you have, of course, Hungary has, its elections in April, Viktor Orban doing well. The point is, just like in America, you have ordinary people, right? There are 2 Europes, the the Europe of the bureaucrats, and then the ordinary people who just wanna live ordinary lives, not be told what to do, not be told, that they're bad or evil for wanting migrants out, um, safe streets, etcetera.
Safe streets, safe cities. It's what we're going through in America right now. I mean, when I was there in Budapest for 3 months last year, and what's so shocking to me is one, there's two things. There's the value put on outdoor space, these communal spaces. There's a premium there because the homes, from what I can gather, the average European home is not on a 2-acre estate with a pool and a tennis court in the backyard, right? I mean, we have a lot of those here. Even middle class homes can have pools and tennis courts and basketball, so you can kind of do life right in your backyard and in your home. You have a home theater. But in Hungary, you have a little teeny apartment. It may be a nice size apartment, but you kind of want to get out, right? I mean, I feel like it pushes you out a little bit. The intention was to spend. I think the whole thing's built differently. I mean, it's built for community and pedestrians to walk and to take public transportation that has to actually work. That actually the bus has to show up on time because there's lots of people taking the bus and lots of people taking to the tram. And amazingly, it does work. It's inexpensive. And oh, by the way, it's also safe. You're not going to get knifed in the neck by mostly in some of these countries, right? Hungary, particularly. It's incredibly safe. I've got 2 daughters, 16 and 13, and my wife and I could let them go out all hours of the night. It didn't matter when. They could walk out 2 o'clock in the morning, be totally fine. I remember a cab driver telling us he was a former policeman in Budapest for 25 years. And he said, I don't think he had one homicide case in the entire 25 years in a city of 2 million people. Not one. Okay. Yeah. Go to Baltimore or Cleveland or Philadelphia, or just pick your US city, and there might be 200 this weekend, right? Or 25 this weekend or whatever, right? I mean, it's just not, and you've got to recover all the great cities of America. And we elected our first, socialist in New York to be the mayor, a Muslim, who is quoting Karl Marx. Okay, let's see how that works out. Yeah, and I get the anger part. I get people are fed up. They want something different. I don't think that's the answer, but yeah, but safe cities, safe places, the premium on outdoor, communal, places where people can gather and not be shot or killed or maimed or whatever. It's remarkable that I remember my wife and I were like, well, this actually works. We can see a functioning society with a functioning government. How about that? We've never seen that in America.
Well, I think this has been true for a long time, but the contrast between different European cities is really stark these days. So, I mean, it's hard to tell whether you're in Baltimore or London, when it comes to crime rates, and I think your experience in Budapest is exactly pointing to the success of Viktor Orban's migration policy. So, he said, "No, not coming in. Y we don't have the capacity to have hundreds of thousands of new people coming to Hungary who are not culturally the same. We're just not going to do it." And so your daughters can go out at 2 a.m. in Budapest and be perfectly safe. There are Christmas markets in Germany who are canceling this year because it's unsafe. You had, of course, on Saturday, 10 people, 11 people, um, stabbed on a train in headed to London, and just days before that, a man walking his dog murdered by an Afghan migrant, also in England. The crime in many European cities is just out of control, and of course, you combine that with no Second Amendment, so people are unarmed, and in many places, and definitely in England, even the cops are unarmed. I mean, they don't have guns.
Right. Right. That's crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah, totally crazy.
Yeah, I think, what I found, and I lean Eastern European or Central European because that's my ancestry, A. But B, there's also this big safety thing, right? I mean, there's a stark divide when you go from, Vienna into Bratislava and start going that way. All of a sudden, you kind of sense it, you feel it, or I suppose you're right. I mean, I flew into France, and the airport that's the one that says Paris, but it's not really Paris. It's 2 hours north of Paris. I'm like, oh, okay. It's like Baltimore Washington Airport. It's not right. It's not even close to Washington. People say, oh, would you pick me up in Bewee? I'm like, no, because that's 2 hours north of Washington.
Uh, it's not close to Baltimore or Washington.
No, no. So I did this, and you take the bus into Paris. And I remember the bus dropped me off at Karl Marx Square in downtown Paris, and it was essentially I was in, may have been, central Congo, and it was people cooking food on the streets, and I thought, okay, I got to get out of here. It was not a safe place you know for me, or and at least that was my sense. But yeah, you go to the east, and everything seems to change. It's normal, and, to say that and I did some time in Russia, did a vacation in Russia, 'cause I wanted to see it, and I felt safe there. I thought, "Wow, Moscow and St. Petersburg, they're not gonna mess there's nothing to be I don't need to look over my shoulder or think I don't have to think twice about it." But you're right. So there's that push too, right? Where those countries are saying, "Hey, we wanna keep our religion. We want to keep the definition of family, the definition of a man and woman, all the kind of stuff that we shouldn't be having to talk about, but we have to have that conversation. And Brussels don't like them having that conversation.
Well, right. I mean, Brussels wants, all of the European Union to basically get in line, be this homogenized, multicultural, um, I don't know, melting pot, um, that doesn't preserve any of its own character, doesn't have any of its own decision making, and, we can see what a mess it is. I mean, anybody who's spent 10 minutes in the city of Brussels will say what a disaster this kind of policy is. I mean, Brussels is super dangerous. And I can say as someone who has lived here in Europe, in Austria, in Vienna for long enough to remember what it was like here before the wave of migrants who came in 2015 and 2016 when, Chancellor Angela Merkel said, "Everyone's welcome." And Vienna has changed. What's very interesting to me is, I remember the first time I went to Budapest, and this was even before I lived in Europe. It was probably, I don't know, 17 or 18 years ago. It was perfectly safe, but it was kind of, maybe a little shabby, and Vienna was so beautiful and grand, and, Vienna is still beautiful, but Budapest is no longer shabby, and it is demonstrably safer. I feel safe enough in Vienna, I'm not scared in Vienna, but there are things I mean, I wouldn't be out at 2 well, I'm too old to be out at 2 AM, but I wouldn't go out by myself at 2 AM, in Vienna, no way, but in Budapest, if I were awake, I would do it, no problem.
Yeah, and I think right to expect and look, the American experiment is, out of many, one, right? Right. And people say that's our greatest gift is this idea that we're a diverse country. We have all this diversity in cultures. And I think the truth is it's our greatest challenge right now. It's not a gift. I think people are starting to say that, like, hey, we have some issues here we've got to deal with. And how can you expect people to come from Latin and South America to have the ideas of liberty that have been enshrined in our country for the last 250 years? They don't understand that. It took us 250 years to get there from, 16 whatever to, 1776. It wasn't born overnight. In the theater of dropping pocket constitutions in downtown Baghdad, hoping they're all going to become Republicans. It's like, okay, well, are you kidding me? I mean, there's some people that, frankly, I think it's okay to say this, that honestly thrive under and maybe want a totalitarian kind of, or what do you call it, a theocracy, right? I mean, look, for all of his faults, Saddam Hussein ran a pretty tight ship in Iraq. And I was told that you could fly in as a evangelical Presbyterian. I could fly into downtown Baghdad and worship on Sunday morning at First Pres in Baghdad. But after the Americans left, that didn't happen. They can't do that anymore. And he maintained the peace between Shia, Sunni, and the Kurds, right? And he just did. And so, that's just okay. I think that, again, our experience and expectation that, well, people will act like us is crazy. I don't know where that comes from. And I think that Orban and others have said, hey, wait a minute, this is how we do things. And frankly, I can't, even Israel, I can't immigrate to Israel, become an Israeli citizen. No, because I'm not a Jew. They won't let you do that. And I can't no more move to Mexico and become a Mexican citizen because they have their own rules. Yet in America, we're just kind of like, hey, whatever. Come on.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think for a very long time, immigrants to America really saw becoming an American as the prize to win. So the idea was, of course, you keep your family traditions, you cook Italian food, maybe you even speak Italian to your Italian grandmother, maybe you even live in Little Italy, but at the end of the day, you are absolutely American, and that's what you're striving for. To be an American was the prize. It wasn't just to live in America, but to become an American. And that's remarkable. It's a remarkable, unique, and incredibly special thing about America, and that's gotten lost. It's gotten lost, I think, for a number of reasons, not least of which is you have Americans who hate America encouraging new, um, eh, new Americans or newcomers to the country to also hate America. Um, and so that's the thing that's changed because there are plenty of people. I mean, just look at Cubans, for example. Cuban Americans are some of the most patriotic, loyal, country-loving Americans. Do they keep the best of their Cuban culture? Absolutely. Um, but they know what the alternative is, and they love America.
And then part of it was the pride was contributing in that way, right? I mean, my grandparents came over through Ellis Island, Czechoslovakia and Poland and that sort of thing. And they came over and wanted to learn English quickly. And they wanted to, to be part of the melting pot and find the American dream, which they did. And yet their food, and yes, they, to your point, spoke the language. Occasionally would go to the Polish Day parade and, in Montclair or whatever, and that's fine. But it was America first, right? It was no going back to the home country. It was no flying the flag and speaking this way and hating this country at all. They loved this country, and yeah, and I think part of it too. I don't know if you have it in your side, but part of it here is the university system, right, which has taken a lot of rightfully hits that you know you're raising up a whole generation of young people through these state colleges, and every state college is the same. If it's Texas Tech or where I went to George Mason or University of Washington, it's the same curriculum. It's anti-American. If you're in that department, if you're in the political department, sociology or history, it's the same stuff. I mean, you're not going to read the European conservative in those departments, and the professors are not reading that stuff, and they're not voting right of center. So you're building and even public schools, K through 12. I think it's the same thing. There's just not a it's we've gone through critical race theory, and some of these wild ideas that we're indoctrinating our kids with to be suspect of one another, and that's particularly of our country. Is there anything similar like that happening in Europe? Do they have a school system that's kind of this woke, ideological, big state thing happening there?
Yeah, well, um, one comment on America, and then I'll turn to Europe. I was recently in Washington, um, talking about this topic of, the education of young people and how it's gone so wrong. Of course, the name Howard Zinn, comes up. I mean, the Howard Zinnification of the American history curriculum was really, has been such a downfall.
What did Zen do? What was his book? Or
Uh, he wrote, I think it's something like The History of the United States, but it's all, starting with, the slaughter of Indians or Native Americans, and every dead white man did something bad for our whole history, which is a morally corrupt founding and so on and so on. Yeah, here in Europe, that's definitely been a very bad export of the United States, is, this kind of woke intersectionality, casting aside the dead white men who have nothing to say, re-examining countries' histories through the modern lens of intersectionality. I mean, the woke mind virus, it was worse than COVID, for sure, and I mean, places like Hungary try to put a wall against it, places like Poland, but it's everywhere, and I think teachers are taught these terrible, lessons, and then they expose the kids to it. I think what's nice to see in America that I hope will also come over here is the resurgence of, for example, great books education or classical education. So I'm hoping that, as particularly the Catholic Church is involved with a lot of these initiatives, perhaps that wind will blow here too. But yeah, I mean, the kids are getting poisoned in the classroom, and Islam is a much bigger problem here than in the US, and I say problem in the sense that if children are being taught that the Islamic view on certain moral or theological issues is, let's say, on an equal plane with the traditional Judeo-Christian teaching of a country that's had those traditions for years, generations, centuries, that's a big problem here too.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you have to look at and this is brutal, right? I mean, I was talking to somebody the other night, and they were at a local event, and it was talking about the American Indians, and they were looking at the contributions of the American Indians. And there are many. I'm not this, but when you look at the Europeans, it was not a fair fight, right? I mean, the Europeans come in with weapons and ships and guns, and you're like, okay, we know where this is going, right? I mean, and just civilizations are different, and I don't know how it's like we have to rehab this. We have to have this conversation again. In Europe, I'm reading a history of Hungary, written by he's a Jewish gentleman over, and he's actually in Vienna, where you are. I'll have to look his name up. But great big book, and the Hungarians had to push back the Muslims and it opened the way to Jerusalem for the Crusaders to come in and reclaim Jerusalem, all sort of thing. And in some ways, we're kind of doing that again today. It's like, okay, who's going to be our God? What kind of government are we going to have? What kind of civilization? And that sort of thing. And unfortunately, to your point, the Christian civilization is kind of running the other way, our tail tucked between our legs, and the Islam and Muslims they're fighting for what they believe in. So, I mean, look, hats off to them. It's like the Democrat Party here in Virginia. They're fighting. They're taking swings. They're aggressive. They're telling people who they are, what they're doing. It's not like they're hiding it that much. And they're winning. And I think the other side, we've got Trump who will say who he is and what he believes and push back and punch and all that sort of thing. But it's not in our nature, I think, is white Anglo-Saxons to do these kinds of things. We feel uncomfortable and whatever, but it's not a new fight. I guess is where I'm going. This is a kind of something we in the world we've dealt with for a long, long time.
Well, that's right. And here in Europe, unfortunately, let's call them native populations, are really committing demographic suicide by not having children. So if Europeans are not having babies and they're importing migrants from cultures that have lots of babies, well, don't complain, the argument goes. Don't complain when you don't have a civilization anymore. So I think especially young people, I think, are waking up to this, and there is this sort of, let's say, reconquest or a reconquest feeling in the air of, it really is now or never, because unlike America, where I mean, the birth rate isn't what it used to be, but I mean, Europe is in trouble. Europe is in huge trouble, and these are enormous welfare states that, of course, are gonna collapse. But if they're not having any children, that's suicide. I mean, that's civilizational suicide, and there's no other way to put it.
Yeah, it's Buchanan, one of my great heroes years ago, wrote a book called Suicide of the West, and I think it was published, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago. And he ran the demographic numbers, and I think a lot of them were pointed to about the year 2025, which is where we are. And yeah, you're right. And so, well, I want to because I want to come back to European conservative, how we get to how folks find the magazine, and I want to stay there a minute, but before we go there, let's on the birth rate question, and you've talked about this in the magazine. What governments are paying people in some cases to have kids or giving them tax breaks. Say, hey, if you have 5 kids, you don't pay taxes to the state ever. That's still not working. It doesn't appear. What say you? What do we do? What can be done?
I think certainly if countries are not, if they want their birth rates to change, they should probably make it illegal to kill babies through abortion. That's number one. Number two, I mean, I'm not sure that a government can change a culture, because young people might feel fired up and patriotic, but they're looking around and saying, "What's the future?" I mean, I'm not saying that young people or young couples not having children is because they're worried. I think we have a lot of selfishness. I think the media and pop culture has basically said, "Don't worry about it. Freeze your eggs. Yeah, maybe. You can have kids at 40. Don't worry about it. Live your life. YOLO, right? Is that it? YOLO. Yes, you only live once." So I mean, it's cultural, and I don't know that there's a political answer.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. I'm pushing that way because I tend to agree, right? The government can't force this, or even through propaganda. And again, I like the Hungarian propaganda. You get off the airport in Hungary, and there's all these beautiful pictures of families having kids. And the ticker tape at the airport says God, family, and country. I'm like, okay, this is great. You get off at Heathrow, you have 2 lesbians kissing each other on a Jumbotron. And that's true. That's what we saw, right?
Oh, I know. I believe you.
And either one, I don't know that either one. I mean, maybe one is acknowledging the fact that that's what's happening or whatever. But what, and the other, the Hungarians are trying to say, hey, look, we want to really promote this. But ultimately, I think it's spiritual. I mean, I think the thing that the Muslims, say what you will. I mean, I'm not a Muslim, but they have a belief. They really believe in their faith, and they're the ones that are having children. and Christians are not.
Well, this is true. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but, I mean, this is really true. I mean, think about Israel, another great example. So Israel has basically, since its founding, been an insecure place, right? I mean, they're surrounded by enemies, always under attack, and their birth rates are fantastic.
Highest in the world, I think.
And this is spiritual. It's not political. I mean, in fact, I think Israeli people are certainly much more, faithful than any government bureaucrats. They're not doing it for the government, but they're doing it not only because it's part of their faith, the family, but it's also that they understand that the only way to save their civilization is to keep it going. I mean, and they live that, right? So perhaps we in Western Europe, perhaps in America, we've assumed for so long that, like, of course we're gonna keep going. Of course our civilization isn't gonna die. Um, maybe I mean, I'm not suggesting that it would be a good idea for us to be under more threat than we already are, but I do think that when you really realize that you have to keep your civilization going if you want it to exist, that maybe we haven't woken up to that yet. And that's not political. It's spiritual, it's philosophical.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on. I think that's it, and that's something the government can't conjure up, right? I mean, it has to be the church part. That's the faith piece. That's the Holy Spirit. By the way, let's come back to you guys. You guys aren't afraid to talk about that. You're not afraid to talk about spiritual things or sell spiritual books or talk about, I saw something, one of the back of the magazines, the proclamation of the birth of Christ on the back of your magazine there.
Yeah, not afraid.
Ellen, what say you?
Well, I mean, we are, despite all appearances, we're not an explicitly Christian or Catholic magazine, but we think that um, public displays of religiosity are good things, and we think that just as, I mean, it's grown to be such a cliche, but this idea that politics is downstream from culture. Well, we always take it to the next highest step, which is that culture is downstream from the spiritual. So, although there are plenty of, let's say, atheists or non-believers or agnostics who read us and are interested, we think that it's a real problem when people are ashamed or afraid to include, their faith in discussions about culture, discussions about politics, because it should inform one's conscience and inform one's decisions. So we love it.
Yeah, so you talk about openly, you everything from recommending whiskey to, celebrating the birth of Christ and everything in between. Yeah, I think that's it's not, I would say in our country, it's not narrow-minded, right? I mean, we have a very high religious participation rate still in America, the highest in the world, maybe one of the highest in the world, and so you're not, for lack of a better term, narrow-minded, and you really kind of embrace all of life, which is kind of a European trait too, right? Life is big, it's abundant, it's all the things. It's travel, it's food, it's politics, it's beauty. It's just that's a different mindset than Americans, I think. I think we just don't have we have a production mindset, a 40 work mindset. That's you get a vacation and you get away for a week. And while our friends in Italy are taking every other weekend off because they have Saints days every weekend or whatever. So it's a whole different thing, right? We look at the French take off the entire country takes off for 3 months. We're like, what? you know, we sort of make fun of it, but I think we'd all love to be able to say we could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's certainly interesting. I wanna read you, just another point about the European conservatives, and I think this might make the point pretty well, and this is from our about page, for about the magazine on our website, europeanconservative.com. And so we say, "We publish a range of viewpoints from the right, broadly conceived. including but not limited to agrarians, anti-statists, classical liberals, decentralists, integralists, monarchists, nationalists, populists, radical localists, sovereigntists, and the various motley defenders of what used to be called Western civilization, the Judeo-Christian West, or simply Christendom.
That's really good. That's on your website. What is the website name?
So it's europeanconservative.com, and then we have a special section for the magazine. You can easily find it on the website, and so that phrase is there in the about the magazine section, and we love it.
And Americans can subscribe.
Yes. Well, a caveat: Americans can subscribe, and up until very recently, they would receive their magazine in the mail with no problem. We have run into a little bump in the road with tariffs.
Oh gosh. Trump's tariffs are affecting the European Conservative magazine.
Yes, because, in fact, many of the international shipping companies, DHL, UPS, GLS, all these other ones, don't wanna deal with meeting tariffs at the, US border, and because this is the only thing that isn't subject to a tariff is getting a letter in the mail, basically, because, the Trump administration got rid of the de minimis, tariff. That's like, you order some junk from China for $5 and you wouldn't have to pay a tariff. Well, a beautiful magazine from Europe.
Yes.
So we're trying to figure out a solution, but they can subscribe, get a digital copy, or you can go to your local Barnes and Noble anywhere in the United States of America. You can go to a Barnes and Noble, and they will have the European Conservative.
And what is the cost? $14, $20?
Yeah, our cover price is around 15. I don't know what Barnes and Noble is charging, but just imagine it'll last you for 3 months until the next one comes out.
Well, you don't throw them away anyway because they're so beautiful.
No, they are beautiful.
You just can't, right? I mean, again, this is the thing about high art. It's like, yeah, no, I'm just gonna hold on to it. So in my other life, we do a lot of printing. Print it in the States.
I know.
I mean, just find a printer in the States and you do it that way and you get around the tariff thing. But
Exactly.
so you told me when we first talked that you have a lot of Americans that subscribe, right?
Yes. In fact, this has been true since the very beginning. About 50% of our audience, and this is for the print magazine, hits on our website, social media followers, newsletter subscribers across all platforms. About 50% are based in America. And we love that because we think Americans really do want to know what's going on in Europe, and they don't want to go to some lefty website like The Guardian to try to navigate what's going on here on the continent. Exactly. So we love our American audience. Mario and I are Americans. We love to have events in the US. Our friends invite us to give talks. And so, yes, plenty of American subscribers, and we hope to keep getting more.
Yeah, that's neat. That's really neat. Well, look, we'll have you back at some point. Get this thing launched. But terrific conversation. Yeah, and to folks who want to understand, not only what's happening in Europe, but to be encouraged in the walk of this, this life we call it conservatism. I don't know. It's kind of this Western way of seeing the world and having that reinforced. This is a great magazine to do it. It encourages you to take that walk. There are other people that are doing this. We're not weird. This is perfectly normal and natural. And you guys are pointing the way to kind of a very good, sound, smart recovery. So anyway, Ellen, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Matt. It was such a pleasure.
And we'll roll this out. We'll let you see all the clips and things on LinkedIn and the YouTube channel. And you guys got rights to all the assets and just do with it what you will.
Cool. Great.
All right. See you.
Thanks for having me.
Against the Current podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.